Thank you. Our next speaker is Yuta Williams from Google AI. Yuta is a senior program manager for Google AI whose work focuses on applying machine learning to health data to improve availability and accuracy of medical care. She joined Google in late 2016 after working as Chief Compliance Officer, Chief Information Assurance Officer, and Chief Privacy Officer for 2 integrated healthcare delivery networks in the US. Yuta worked for 4 big consulting firms to help clients in a number of industries build security and privacy programs, and worked as a product manager and security engineer for several US federal agencies to secure information assets. She graduated with highest distinction from Carnegie Mellon University, earning a master's in information security, policy, and management. She is the current head of the US delegation on AI standards to the International Standards Organization, and is the international project editor for standards development in the area of statistical bias and AI system. Please help me welcome Yuta Williams.
Man, I did all that. This is what happens when you go wherever the wind blows. You get a really interesting career that follows a lot of interesting pathways. Now, I have changed my slides 5 times today, so this gentleman here has been very busy. And we'll see if, because everybody had such interesting points to make. He asked me why, because I'm fickle. That's a really good explanation of me. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about ML and AI models that have the potential to transform health. And we've had some amazing presenters who have been very technical, deep dive, statistical analysis that I couldn't follow because I did really poorly in statistics. And then we had a really great presentation from IBM on clinical care and how a really interesting clinical use case would be designed and presented to as an end user use case, which is great. I'm not going to talk a little about that quite as much. I actually have a very ulterior motive in my presentation today, and that's to convince all of you data scientists to go into healthcare. So I'm gonna pull at your heartstrings a little bit and tell you about why I work in healthcare. So I don't know if you can tell what this is from this picture. This is my niece, Nim. Nim was born in 2010, and she's a healthy little kid. She's in the 95th percentile height and weight. So I'm going to give you the good news at the beginning so you don't think there's a tragic end story here. She's perfect developmentally, but I want to talk about why data science matters in health. I don't know if you can tell, but this is my brother's wedding ring right here. It's about 3/4 of the way up her arm. She weighed 1 pound and 3 ounces, which is just a little bit over half a kilogram. She was 11 inches long, which is about the same length as a Barbie doll. And when she was born, we were fortunate that she was born near an academic research university hospital where there were pediatric specialists who understood her many, many disease states, and were able to use 6 different information systems that were tied to her body at all times to monitor over 250 data points that allowed her to be developmentally perfect in the end. So this was almost 10 years ago. And none of that technology used machine learning or artificial intelligence or any kind of real rational methodology other than to track data, build specific alerts for different types of illness, and make sure that people intervene in her care at the right moments in time. And consequently, she's an A student. I mentioned she's tall and healthy and perfect. So, and she's my only brother's only daughter, so she's my only niece. So I think it's pretty important that she survived. So this is why healthcare matters. You can talk to financial services people all day long about that extra decimal point that's going to move left or right based on your work. It's all very important, but this is why I work in healthcare and why after a career of chasing whatever interesting problem kind of dropped in front of me, I landed in healthcare and I was humbled by it, and I stayed there for the last almost 15 years. So I want to talk a little bit about women in healthcare. I alluded to this a little bit earlier, is women are pretty amazing. By the way, we listen. So the very first point I want to make is that on average, women physicians will wait almost 3 minutes to interrupt you when you're talking about how you feel. Compared to men, sorry men, I appreciate your allies here, but you interrupt after 47 seconds. And my husband would say that I'm a standard deviation a bit to the left, maybe 2, because I interrupt way sooner than 3 minutes. But on average, we listen, and I think that that makes really important differentials in how we deliver healthcare. So when you look at big data, you can see that women actually produce better outcomes than male doctors. Not by a lot, but by 0.5 point. And that matters to the 26,000 people who would otherwise have died last year in the US. And the other thing I would suggest is that women, and especially 40-year-old women, are our target demographic in the healthcare business because they're taking care of their families and their parents and their spouses, and they are making most of the clinical decisions in our world. And even though we're 80% of the people making we're making 80% of the buying decisions around how healthcare is delivered at home and in the healthcare systems that we all participate in, we're actually underrepresented as far as decision making is concerned. So it's a traditionally supportive industry for women. So there's 65% of the population that work in health, but not necessarily in leadership positions. And I can speak from personal experience, it's not so much in IT. So I'm really, really, really hopeful that you'll all choose this as a profession. And I could stop right now because I can see smiles and I know you all just were convinced. So, but we'll still talk about AI. So this is my definition and the definition of some of my friends. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all these kind of buzzwords and terms are not very well or formally documented. I went to a conference 2 years ago. It was called HIMSS. It's a very, very large healthcare conference in the United States. There were 6 football fields, that's American football, field-sized vendor displays. It's very large. And almost every one of them had a banner that said, artificial intelligence. So I went and I talked to a few, and I said, well, what does that mean to you? And they're like, we have structured data. And I was like, and that's AI? And they're like, well, we're AI ready. So AI isn't very well understood, and those defined terms are something that we're working on in the standards world so that we can all kind of use similar terminology. But by and large, what I consider it is basically making machines seem intelligent, like they're acting like we would. And then on the machine learning side, we're actually trying to make machines learn, kind of like we would. And then there's this little button called robotics, and I put it in there because inevitably, when I talk about machines that learn, somebody brings up the Terminator and Skynet. And really, robotics is just another vector point in this Venn diagram that suggests that sometimes when we move things around, there's this little tiny segment, her name's Sophia, and she got citizenship here in the Middle East. Right, in Saudi Arabia, which is where I was raised, by the way, in case you were all wondering why I am the way I am. Sophia got citizenship right here in the Middle East. It's quite advanced, it's quite forward-thinking and forward-leaning, and it's amazing. And I mean that with all the love in the world. I am the way I am because I grew up in an amazing part of the world. So all kinds of technologies fit within these Venn diagrams, but my world and what I focus on is really this machine learning bit, and particularly those that look like they might be intelligent. So we will move on to this absolute fact that ML is everywhere. I think some of you might be using Google today. Most of our really cool technologies have embedded machine learning in them. And there's some direct application to healthcare, and I brought this slide up for a reason, is that photos, and we talked a little bit about transfer learning. Is Cassie still here? I don't know if she's here anymore. She's gone, yeah. Cassie talked about the importance of transfer learning and that you need large quantities of data to train really good models. So these technologies, photos and the predictive text writing for the inbox application and maps even for recommending pathways that are safe, are things that actually have transfer learning potential for healthcare. So we're going to talk a lot more about like imaging and image detection and the uses of some of these technologies for imaging, and also for some of the predictive text around things like medical records and recommending kind of additional documentation that might be necessary for a medical record. And then for care pathways, it's remarkable how much actual correlation there is to recommending a person with kind of a common healthcare trajectory and traffic patterns. And that some of that transfer learning is actually applicable, that you can make recommendations for how someone's disease might progress, similar to how you might recommend how somebody's traffic experience is going to project. So the fact that we have some of this underlying technology means that we can do a bit more adjustment and training on smaller data sets in healthcare because we have underlying technology that's been trained on very large data sets. And that is, I think, kind of unique. And we make a lot of that available publicly for our startup friends, who's not here anymore. Oh, So machine learning isn't magic. We talked a little bit about this word magic. I actually had it in here before. This is not one of the slides I changed 5 times. It's just a new engineering approach. And I want to talk a little bit about why now. Why is it something that we're doing now, right? The idea of artificial intelligence has been around for a very long time, decades and decades. But there are a couple of key components that maybe we didn't have. The first was computational resource. We had some questions about computational resource, and I met a really amazing PhD student who's using some great geo-related, I can't see you. But computational resources have evolved and changed a lot in the last couple of years. And I don't know if you remember, how many of you might have even been too young to remember, but 8-bit graphics. Do you remember the video games that had the little 8-bit characters and the 8-bit music? Well, over time, we decided that, that 8-bit graphic and music experience was cheesy, and we wanted it to improve. And so we invested in hardware that would accelerate and make that experience better. And that's why we have really great graphic cards that are dedicated computational resources to graphics, and the same for music. Well, the same thing is happening for computational things necessary for AI to thrive. And so we have what we call TensorFlow processing units, TPUs or GPUs. And these are chips and capability that's designed specifically to accelerate machine learning tasks. And with the advent of those computational resources, and also the tools that have actually been around for quite some time, and the proliferation of data for training examples, and all of you all who are going to come with really great creativity and ingenuity, it is the time for AI to thrive, and especially in healthcare, in my opinion. So, AI is actually or machine learning is actually super easy. It's the same sort of learning that we do with kids. So let's talk a little bit about how people learn. You start with an input. The machine, which is our brain, makes a prediction about something. How many of you ever tried to teach a child about a giraffe, like what a giraffe looks like? I'm going to say everybody has at some point. When you show them a picture of a giraffe and you say, what is this? And they've never experienced a giraffe before, they're going to say, oh, it looks like a horse with a really long neck. So they're going to make a prediction and say that that picture looks like a horse. And then the truth sayer, the person who actually knows the truth of this, is going to give them some sort of new parameter and say, well, it looks like a horse but has a really long neck. It's actually what we call a giraffe, especially if it has spots of this particular color, or if you find it in a picture book about Africa. And that goes back into the little person's brain. And our little gray matter is really good at adapting to change. And then the next time they see a picture of a giraffe, they're more likely to actually say that's a giraffe instead of a horse, right? The same thing happened when we tried to train Google Images to understand what is a cat with a party hat. And I always use cats with party hats because nobody seems to take offense at that. So first we taught it about cats, and then we taught it about party hats. And a really surprising thing happened. So when you showed them a picture with a cat with a party hat, it was able to predict and label it specifically cats and party hats. And then over time, it got really good at recognizing cats versus dogs, or Persian cats versus Bengal cats, and things like that. So over time, as long as there's a learner or somebody who's going to be the truth teller to give reinforced learning to these algorithms, they're going to get better and better and better. So we thought that there's a couple of things we do well at Google. And one of them is translate, and I meant to do this because I want to talk a little bit about translate. Let's see if it works. No, it's not. Somebody asked about mechanical engineering and whether they should go into mechanical engineering. She's over here. She's gone. Okay. So my undergraduate degree was in political science and Middle East area studies with an emphasis on Arabic and Turkish. Not very conducive to data science, but that just goes to prove that you can apply data science to just about anything. So the Translate product, which can run offline, used to be about 500,000 lines of code, which was really long, and it wasn't that great. I don't know if you all use it very often now, but it got a lot better very recently. And the reason it got really a lot better is that it started using deep neural networks and the ability to use machine learning and reinforced learning to improve its capability. But it also had a really remarkable effect on the size of the code. It went from 500,000 lines of code to 500, which meant you could download it and you could work with it offline. It didn't need the cloud anymore in order for it to work. And that's also a goal for us for some of these medical applications, is that most of the world doesn't have ready access to the internet, but does have a significant need for healthcare. So we're focused on a couple of things that we think will make a difference in the world. And the first is around diagnostics. And I'm going to spend most of my time on diagnostics because I have a short period of time to be successfully on time today. So we thought, and we talked a little bit about inspiration, we thought, diagnostic accuracy is not so great. So if 1 in 12 people diagnosed with breast cancer, most of whom are women, get a bad diagnosis, that means that they're either living with a diagnosis of cancer when they are actually not ill, or they were misdiagnosed and not getting treatment. That's a pretty terrible statistic. So we thought, there has to be an opportunity using machine learning to do better at this particular thing of diagnostic accuracy. So we took a look at 2 different types of modalities, and we took a look at what kind of data could we get, and how definitively could we train a data set. And this goes to some of the conversation we had earlier about choosing the right sorts of problems to solve, and knowing that you're going to be able to improve on that model over time. So we took a look at things like cancer pathology and diabetic retinopathy. So for those that aren't familiar, if you have diabetes, there's an effect on your eyesight for a certain population that can actually lead itself to blindness if not treated. And the treatment isn't terribly invasive or difficult, but you have to be screened routinely, and you have to get treatment pretty quickly once you're diagnosed with the potential. But unfortunately, there's a real lack of ophthalmologists in this world, and particularly in the third world. So screening is actually not as available as you would think. So then we took a look at, and it's very clear, when you take a look at the picture of the eyeball is called a fundus image. If you take a look at that image, it's pretty clear. You either are or are not something, right? So you have a fairly definitive diagnosis. And if you take a look at a cancer patient or a pathology slide, cancer may not present for some number of years. So it's not super clear that when you're training a model that it is or isn't cancer, because diagnosis comes sometimes very much later than the actual pathology slide was taken. So we took a look at diabetic retinopathy and thought, let's train on something that we can actually prove is effective. And we looked at diabetic retinopathy and its pervasiveness in the world and said, well, there's about 415 million people with diabetes, and all these folks are at risk for going blind. That seems like a really big problem. And we like to solve really big problems. So we started by saying, well, we don't have a lot of data. Where can we get data? But what was also interesting, and I want to make mention of this before I move to the next slide, is that the underlying ML modeling was the same as for the cats with party hats, right? We were just training it on fundus images using the same neural network that I showed you a moment ago. Oops, did I? Maybe it's ahead. I moved them all around while I was doing my thing. It's using the exact same neural network model as a normal image would use for Google Images. It's just that we trained it with fundus data instead of with cats with party hats. So that meant that we needed a lot less data in order for us to take the existing model that we transferred into this space and then retrained on this particular illness. So we went to India, particularly, and it wasn't for the reasons some people would try to project on us. It wasn't easy. No clinical research is easy. But we went there because there was a real need. And our CEO is from India. And we wanted to make sure we were making a difference for a population that didn't necessarily have access to first world health. Hi. ACEs. So we thought, well, let's go here. And we're in a country where about 45% of people who have this illness might go blind before they can even see a screener. And that's a really terrible outcome when it's completely preventable. So we collected a bunch of pictures of eyeballs, and then we had to label them. So this is really hard in healthcare. We talked about labeling data, and we talked about needing millions of records for some types of learning models. And one of the reasons transfer learning was so important in this space is that it would be incredibly costly, if not impossible, to get 1 million of these things graded and labeled by a trained clinician, right? So, did I mention how much I love photo evidence? So we had a large quantity of records, in this case about 9,000. We hired the best ophthalmologist we could find to do a really great grading effort, and we graded on a 5-point scale between no diabetic retinopathy through proliferative diabetic retinopathy. It was really amazing that doctors don't even agree with themselves. So if I can give you one piece of advice at the end of this presentation, always get a second opinion, because they really, 60% of the time, they don't agree with themselves. So We had to get a committee, actually. We got several ophthalmologists to look at each one of these images and so that we could make sure that we didn't introduce inappropriate bias to the data. And we applied, here's my slide. We applied the same neural network related methodology as we did for cats with party hats on the image search, and just trained it with the fundus image and these very highly accurately graded retina images. And then we added a little bit of extra information just to help with us, like what we thought the image quality was, because they come from different types of cameras, and whether it was a left or right eye, and what kind of field of view was the camera representative of. And we came out with some pretty amazing data. So based on, we built a model. We felt it was pretty accurate based on independent validation data. We found that we were actually really, really good at the same level of sensitivity that was expected for diagnostic care, but we were much more specific, we were much more accurate. So we didn't get it wrong, but we also got it right, which is better than just getting it right. And what we also found was that we were on par with, if not slightly better than, ophthalmologists that we had hired. Now, the one statistic that's not on here that I want to really emphasize is that when you combined the algorithm and the ophthalmologist, the number was 98%. So this is why when people are concerned that we're going to replace doctors with technology, it's not about replacement. It's about taking away the redundant tasks that make doctors tired, unhappy, miserable even, augmenting them with tools and capability that allow them to focus on exactly the right things, and it actually makes both parties better. So pathology is super hard. So we took that learning and we said, let's go look at pathology. And you saw a much better presentation than this on pathology just a moment ago. But I want to give you a kind of an understanding of just how huge these images are that are taken for cancer patients. Like when you take a picture of a path slide, the quality of that image is incredible. It's 150,000 by 90,000 pixels, and a tumor could literally be a couple of pixels across. So when physicians have to look at a path slide and try to find out whether somebody has a cancer, it is incredibly arduous work, and it's really easy to miss, especially small issues. So the system is incredibly good at really monotonous, boring work that our gray matter brains don't like to perform. And so this is an ideal task for a machine learning algorithm. The challenge is really about data. And I know we've all talked about data a number of times, but I want to talk about the healthcare specific rationale for why health data in particular is really hard. So data inconsistency in healthcare is a fact of life. I think that anybody how many of you have ever worked with health data? A good number of you. How much of it was like actually useful? Shui shui? See, my undergraduate degree is really helping me out here today. My experience with healthcare data is that in the United States especially, where electronic health record adoption was really kind of advanced, we incentivized through federal grants and the role of government in some of these programs, it was over here earlier, was to incentivize the adoption of technology and the creation of data. We incentivized the adoption before we created standards for what those systems should look like. And we're going to get a really awesome presentation by Epic because I think that you can make this case better than anybody that there were attempts. We tried really hard to make the data standardized, but in fact, most people kind of adopted the technology in whatever way was least disruptive to their local implementations. And so they used different data labels for different things. Some people said gender, some people said sex, some people used FM, some people used 01. Just the way that it was adopted was just different. And that means that when you collect data from multiple sources, they don't match up. You have to do a lot of data cleaning. And identity is really hard to prove in healthcare as well. At least in the United States, we don't have a national ID number. Do you have a national ID number in Lebanon? No. You probably have a similar problem to us then, which is that data matching is really hard. We get a lot of duplicate data. We get duplicate medical records even within the same medical system. And so it's really difficult for us to get complete data. It's really difficult for us to get clean data. And it's really, really hard to clean it from and remove all the identifiers necessary for clinical research to be really effective and easy. And when you need a lot of data, getting it labeled in such a way that it can be used for machine learning tasks is really expensive because you need clinicians to do it for the most part. Or you need to outsource it to third-party countries, and a lot of people do not want their health data to be leaving their jurisdiction, their local countries. So it's really, really hard to get it clean, to get it consistent, to get it labeled, and only then can you build a machine learning task And I was joking with one of my team members the other day that we spend 80% of our time on acquiring data and only 20% modeling. And he says, Yuta, he says, you spent 14 months getting me the data. It took me 2 days to build the model. That's no joke. The modeling tasks are not that hard, but getting the data clean, ready, and capable of being used is actually that challenging. De-identification and anonymization is almost impossible in this day and age, and not just for Google because we have a lot of data. It's just that people have become so unique, and the largest number of public data sets ever in our existence are now available for comparison. To prove de-identification and anonymization is really almost a nearly impossible task under especially the GDPR rules. And so it really impacts medical research in a pretty substantial way. We were working with one country on a research project, and that country actually decided to shut down all medical research, not just our project, but all medical research until GDPR shook out. So this is the new privacy law in Europe. It makes it really difficult to understand how anonymization and pseudo-anonymization applies to health data. And so since the national health system we were working with was also subject to citizen concerns over how their data is used, they chose to just stop medical research completely until this law played out in courts for a while. And how tragic is that? As data scientists, you should be as appalled as I am. So, since I'm nearly out of time, I did want to talk a little bit about why healthcare is the place to be, because I'm still selling, I know. So healthcare investments have been top of all industry lists in AI since 2013 when this particular study began. And over the last year and a half, 2 years, investment dollars have become even more significant in the spaces of healthcare AI, computer vision, business intelligence, and smart robotics. So these are the kind of the big prime areas where AI investments are occurring. This is where a lot of startups are getting funded. This is where a lot of businesses are hiring. So I would still suggest that healthcare is top of mind for most people. I think that you see it in the news pretty much every day. Oh, I've been seeing Google's AI projects on the news a lot lately too, where we're trying really hard to advance healthcare in AI and making some substantial investments in that space. But it's also important for you to note that the AI global talent pool is really small, that you guys are special. Choosing this as a space is I think, career advantageous. That according to this report from the Gagne report, there's only 2,200 PhD-educated data scientists in this field in the whole world, and that only 3,000 of them are looking for work. So I know that in the Silicon Valley area, you can't hire a data scientist with any kind of AI experience right now. There's just nobody on the market. So this is a great place to spend your time. This slide would recommend healthcare, just like my pitch at the very beginning. But I would suggest that your interest in the space, your interest in being a data scientist is substantial, and please, please do choose healthcare if you decide to go to market with your skills outside of academia. Okay, thanks.
Okay, this was really interesting. Thank you. Our next speaker is Lila Vaughn, who's the Director of Accounts for the Middle East at Epic. She is also account executive for US and elsewhere in the world, and she does so many things, defines and executes the strategy of building Epic's presence in the Middle East, monitors deployment in the region, drives ongoing improvement in implementation. So, okay, so welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe I will just stay. Good afternoon, everyone. And hello to all the people in this simulcast. I understand there's a lot of people out there, and I saw some of our AUBMC friends outside, so hello. My name's Lila Vaughn. I'm from Epic, and accepting the people from AUBMC, the rest of you How many of you have heard of us? Okay, that actually shocks me. We have never had any marketing in our entire 40 years. I'm going to talk a little about that. We have grown just word of mouth. And I'm going to talk a bit about what our customers are doing with analytics, but also touch on a few other things that came up with the panel and some questions. So building a startup, growing a company, how to shine in a big company. What was another one? Going to school for one thing and not sure if you want to do another thing. We're going to talk about all those things. Okay. So we have about 420 total clients worldwide, so not that many when you think about it, but they tend to be very large healthcare institutions, academic medical centers, children's hospitals. And at this point in time, quite a few groups have been using our system for many years, so there's a lot of data. And our focus as a company and our customers' focus has really been how to get the value out of the data. And we think, and I think, like you just said, really the intersection of healthcare and technology is the most exciting place to be. There is so much potential, and you actually have the ability to see it get in the hands of users and change patients' lives. A couple of these, you'll notice dollars are highlighted, but this is really about using analytics in ways that increase care. So this is a safety net health system in Chicago, and their outcome was they were able to widen their care while increasing revenue. And I think this is really one of the major potentials of analytics, artificial intelligence, is to be able to care better for vulnerable populations, because you can do so much with fewer resources. This is a safety net health system in California, Santa Clara, and again, they were able to earn more revenue. Metro Health, this is an interesting group. They're another safety net healthcare. When I say safety net in the US, it's really not assumed in the US that you have healthcare. It's been a major issue in our country. And the safety nets are kind of the healthcare providers of the last resort for many people. So every dollar that they're able to save or earn more revenue, there's more people they can care for. This group is interesting too, in that with the system, they were able to do research studies with 2 medical students, unpaid. So just imagine the potential there by having access to the data. This is now we're getting into saving lives. North Oaks, from intelligence in the system and being able to put this back into the workflow to the users at the right moment in time, having reduction in mortality with sepsis. And Jumana from AUBMC is going to speak after me and talk specifically about some things they've seen already there. And the reason I'm here, by the way, is because of AUBMC. They're one of our customers. They went live last fall, and you all heard about that in the beginning of the day. And we're just so proud of them. It's been a real achievement. It's the first implementation of its kind in Lebanon, and there are elements of it that's really the first worldwide. We're so, so proud of them. Anyway, so our community, I mentioned about 420 total customers. They all share almost everything with each other, including analytics, data models, best practice advisories. And where our attention truly is making sure that the tools are with all the right people. And for us, that really means the clinicians. So we've worked hard on a tool that we call Slicer Dicer, and it's been really fun for me to just listen all day long to all the great speakers. But you heard the word slice, you heard the word dice, you heard the word split. So it made me think we at least came up with a name that makes sense. We don't always do that. But this is a way for having it user-friendly and for allowing clinicians to follow their hunches. And by getting rid of all those middle layers that can be prohibitive from people taking an idea and exploring it and figuring out something truly interesting. Okay, so a little bit about us as a company. So again, I'm quite startled by how many of you have heard of us. We got our start pretty humble beginnings. In 1979, can you hear that music? Okay. Our CEO was the founder of the company, so it was just her. And we've been talking about women in data science all day. She was a computer scientist, a system programmer, working as a graduate student for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And really what became Epic was an outgrowth of work that she was doing as a grad student with some of the clinical researchers. And the problem that she had to solve was how to capture patient data as it changed over time. So it's really interesting. Some things were obvious to her, that the whole system should be centered around the patient with the patient at the middle. Other things took time to figure out and a lot of just thinking and doing other things. And the one that took really 6 months was figuring out how to capture all the different patient data. Some things hardly ever change, like your sex. Some things change just a few times, like your marital status. Some things change a lot, like your medications, your vital signs, and figuring out the best way to capture that and make it useful and fast. This is a picture of the apartment building in which Epic got its start in '79. So if any of you have been to Madison, Wisconsin, you maybe will recognize this is on Old University, where a lot of the graduate students live. And behind these bushes here on the left of the screen was Epic in a 2-bedroom apartment. This is a picture of the people early in the company's history. It's one of my favorite pictures. And Judy, who's our CEO, she is there in the bottom left. So truly a software developer. I mean, when the company started, she wore jeans, she cut her own hair, didn't know anything about running a company. So where are we now? We are private, employee-owned. From those early times there, we've never taken a cent of anyone else's money, no venture capital. We've stayed private, we'll do so forever. 72% of the US population has a record in Epic now. So when you think about the US population being around 325 million, it's a huge responsibility on our shoulders and clearly a lot of data. This is something I know that is familiar to the AUBMC people, but for those that aren't in healthcare IT day in, day out, this is from HIMSS Analytics. They're an independent body, and what they do is they go out to healthcare systems all over the world, and they survey how they are using the systems that they've implemented. So these are a scale. At the bottom here, stage 0 means that you're still largely on paper, maybe even in lab, pharmacy or radiology. And then you move your way up. So at the highest level, stage 7 being that you are using a system for ambulatory care, for inpatient care, for the emergency department. You're getting clinical decision support. You're exchanging data with other health systems, other exchanges, and that you're using analytics. Now, of those that have achieved stage 7 on the ambulatory side in the United States, almost all of them, 93%, are on Epic. On the hospitals, 83%. And that has stayed about the same globally. We are in 14 countries now. And we see interesting correlations with groups that are stage 7 and how they perform. So these are two third-party measures here about quality and safety. And you can see the big difference between the groups that are still performing high at stage 6 and those that are stage 7. And then also financial performance. So those that are stage 7 are financially better off, healthier. And I think to all of you who think about data, it's really intuitive that the more you have in the system, the more data you can explore, the more efficient you can ultimately make these health systems. So it makes a lot of sense. In our 40 years of history, we've never had a hospital leave us by choice. In the United States, this is a big deal. I don't know here in Lebanon, but never had a lawsuit either by a customer. This is probably what we spend most of our time is making sure our customers do well. And one of my most favorite rituals at Epic is every time we have a new customer join us, we play wedding music across the whole campus. It really says what it is. So if you're curious, how did we do it? So starting a company really from not very much at all and getting to this point while staying employee-owned. The first thing is we really think deeply about our philosophies, and our corporate philosophy is taught to every single employee by Judy, our CEO. So new employees start together as a class at the first Monday of the month, and she spends about 3 to 4 hours with every single one of them. And by the way, we're about 10,000 employees now. So one of the things in corporate philosophy that Judy asks of every new employee is, why do you come to work? There's some really obvious ones. Come for the money, come to be challenged because you like the competition, because you care about the mission of healthcare, or because you like working with the customers. And so, you go around and everybody says what they're there for, and it's, we hire a lot of new grads, so it's the most common answer is for the money. I say, that's okay right now. But in 2 years, if that's still your reason, go somewhere else. Time to go. But the more important thing is understanding what's important to Judy so that they understand her philosophy and what's important to the company. And it's really, of all those things, the customers. And I mentioned I've been at Epic almost 18 years. When I was in that class and I heard her say that, I knew I was in the right place, because that's how I think too. The other thing we teach is that our customers are doing really complex and difficult things, and we're behind them, supporting them. So we could say we're heroes helping heroes. And I wanted to tell you this story to you in particular because it kind of brings all of this together. I'm sure some of you have, but have you heard of, in Flint, Michigan, there were many children who got quite ill from lead poisoning? Sounds familiar. Well, the reason that even became known is because of this physician. Her name is Dr. Mona Hatisha. And she was seeing in her clinic, she's a pediatrician, children, and she suspected that she was seeing more elevated lead levels than before. And so she wanted to confirm her suspicion or rule it out. So she goes to the state of Michigan to get data on children's lead levels and couldn't. Then she goes to the county, Hurley County, tries to get information on the children's lead levels. Won't get it, can't get it from there either, kind of stuck. And then she remembers they're using Epic. And Hurley County is the county health system there. They actually had a lot of data. So using the data that was captured in the electronic health record in Epic, she was able to show that indeed there were elevated lead levels, and it was linked to a certain geography. And so what she was able to do with that was then go public with that information, and when everybody at every turn had stopped her from getting that data, she was able to make the case straight to the public that something was wrong. And that actually started a chain of events that allowed the source of water to be changed in Flint, Michigan, for federal aid to Flint, Michigan, and obviously a lot of work left to do. Your own folks, Soumya mentioned this, are also doing pretty heroic things. So with the Global Health Institute, AUBMC, capturing what they have done is created an application to allow refugees to have a record that stays with them. And it also, of course, allows for the potential of research on these refugee populations. There's all sorts of reasons in this world why this is going to be a problem that stays with us for a long time. And the more we can learn about that, the better. And the initial reports, and this is a very small amount of data, but are quite positive as far as how the application is considered by the patients themselves. So as we look at building a company and teaching more people to do well in the way we think they should, we look at how you raise children and really what are the 2 things you need to do to give children. And we think roots, they need strong foundation in this world, and then wings to go off and do wonderful things in this that you can't even imagine right now. So what do we mean by roots? One of those things is teaching ethics. We talked about how we teach our corporate philosophy. One of the things, and many of you may think that caring can't be taught, and we disagree entirely. We think caring can be taught, and we think it's important that our employees know how to care because they're dealing with people on the front lines who can be very stressed out, who've been, working 36 hours without sleep. They need to care. And then also honesty. And I have read places where people think you can't teach honesty. That is not true either. I think often the issue is people don't recognize when they're making a commitment. It's not always as obvious as I'm making a promise to you that I'm going to deliver this by this date. It doesn't come always in that form. So a lot of what we do is teach our staff what are all the ways a promise can be made or inferred, and how to clarify that and make sure that the expectations that we set are clear and that we meet them. And if you're going to have a problem meeting them, how do you get help? How do you escalate? We spend a lot of time on that. This is a trick question, by the way. Any guesses? A woman? Nah, that's true too. The important distinction that we see here, and I think when you look at the founder of a company, you're really looking and peering into the DNA of a company. And Judy is the only founder of the major healthcare IT, kind of the multinationals, that is also a computer scientist. I mentioned she wrote the original system. And that's really shaped everything about our company and how we look at things. Those of you that are looking at where you want to work down the road, I think particularly in this field, you want to know if they care about research and development. 40% of our operating expenses goes right back into the product every year. And then wings, what do we mean by this? And really what we mean is creating an environment for people to flourish, be productive. So one thing, and I'm so curious about my other presenters, how their environments are, but we give all our employees individual offices, and we think that is so important for the type of complex thinking our programmers are doing, and they're keeping all these different trains of thought in their head, and the outcome of bad code is very bad. So the individual offices help people stay concentrated. On the right there, that's our treehouse on our campus. And we think that the environment does shape us. And this wasn't meant to be political, but you can think what you want. That's the Trump Tower in Chicago. These are some other images of our campus. So a couple of things you might pick up on. These buildings are imaginative. They're fun. People want to be there. They're all connected, so our staff are always able to just get up and meet with people. They don't need to video conference just to talk to each other. And they top out at 350 people per building. And the reason why is we saw research when we were first forming the campus that more than that, people stop really collaborating in these kind of more random interactions that create a strong society. So we decided, and we had, now it's very different than Beirut. We have a lot of land in Wisconsin, so we were able to do this. So we talked a lot about, as a group, strategy pretty much in every session. I think strategy is incredibly important, but if you don't have a good culture, the strategy just goes out the window. So it really starts with the people. We hire, like I mentioned, a lot of new grads, all backgrounds. We get tens of thousands of applications every year. We hire 1%. Very test-oriented, score-oriented. We look at GPA, we look at standardized test scores, and then we give our potential staff logic tests. So for example, my background, like everyone else who's talked, I have a master's of fine arts. So I went to school for painting. And I went to Epic when it was a much, much smaller company and took these tests and thought, oh, well, that was a nice place to visit. Like, there were glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Thought I'd never hear from them again. But the nice thing is when you get a call back, you know, wow, I can do this. So we truly believe, regardless of major, if you have the logic skills and the interest, we can teach you how to do a great job. We're non-hierarchical. I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't introduce myself with a title. That's on purpose. We think titles actually create hierarchy in kind of a subtle way. And everyone at Epic, we're all a team. We're just people all working hard to figure out tough things. And the reason titles also create a barrier is you have people all over the place that have really good observations, good ideas, see problems, and the last thing you want to do when you're talking about supporting healthcare organizations and things that can go very wrong is to have people feel like they can't speak up because they're subordinate to somebody. That is death to us. Someone asked a question earlier about how do you shine in a big company, and I guess we're a big company now, or I guess we're like a mid-big company. This is how we look at it so people can self-evaluate. Is this interesting? Would people like to see how we look at this? Okay. The first thing, and we think this is just kind of a given, is you're doing your job well. So the things that you have in your job description, you're excelling at that. That's really step one. That's just the beginning. The next thing is really, how are you leading your team? How are you helping new employees? How are you teaching? How are you raising issues? Then it's the division. So for us, this means software developers, it means testers, it means installers. That you have an influence on the entire division. You make things better for your whole division and change how we do things for the better. The next way, now we're really starting to shine. You're an influence in your company, so cross divisions. And we don't stop there. We have really high standards, by the way, that you're an influence in this industry. In the country, and I would say the world. And I think the possibilities are really endless. And all of us want every single one of our staff to think that there are no limits. Couple of things about just how we run the company. It's very different compared to most tech companies, I think, and part of it is we are employee-owned. We have no budgets. We have no cost centers, no profit centers. I am a salesperson. I've never, ever talked about a budget or quarterly earnings. I really don't even know what that means. But we do know our leading indicators, like when we're doing well, when we're not, and how to change things if we need to. So part of the sales team, there are only 8 of us worldwide, so that's out of a staff of 10,000, and all of us come from implementation. And the reason being is we are selling extremely complex systems, projects. You have to understand what you're committing to. No quotas. No commissions. I'm salaried. Reason being is we think, and again going back to underlying philosophies, financial incentives are very toxic, we think. There's a short-term benefit sometimes. There's almost a long-term detriment. So when we make decisions about where we go, how are we going to invest, we don't talk in terms of years. We talk in terms of tens of years, 30 years, 50 years. 100 years. And the important things about what we do, we ritualize. So our staff, the 10,000 of us, a little less than 10,000 actually, we meet once a month in a room. It's a big room. It's the one right there on the top right. And we go over all sorts of things together. And this is really how we ritualize and keep our culture the same as we get bigger. So for example, we have these 10 commandments, and we go over one every single staff meeting. So you see at the very top, don't go public. The second one, don't be acquired. Just recently, our last staff meeting, you may recognize a few people in these pictures. Keely right here, she was the Epic AUBMC clinical lead. They gave a presentation to our entire staff about this implementation. That is not typical. So I mentioned there were things that we saw as really kind of potentially changing the way we do installs forever after. So they were talking about that, and they said, well, you know, things that went well. It's a learning moment. We also talk about things that were challenges. So there they are talking about that and the construction of the ACC. So this last few things I'm going to talk about is really a glimpse into the future, and actually the future is happening now for our customers. One is exchanging records among different healthcare organizations in the country, in the US, and in the world. And 3.6 million records, not just little pieces of data, entire patient records are exchanged every single day among Epic customers. Virtual health, this is the way the whole world is going. It solves a lot of different problems, actually. We're doing a lot there. And then our colleague from IBM mentioned about other indicators of health beyond the typical that are in the EHR. This is where our focus is as well, particularly social indicators, social determinants of health. And the last thing I want to tell you about is, particularly for you all, is our customers are giving their data, choosing to, some kind of quasi-de-identified into what's called Cosmos. So I'm already with AUB, MC being live on Epic, they're going to have a lot more data at their disposal to do research. This amps it up to the whole Epic community. So we talked about how many patients have their records in Epic. So as you're wanting to broaden your data sets, test things out, this is now happening among Epic customers, what we call Cosmos. So I had a video, but when the music was playing, did you hear it? Oh, okay, then I will play it.
We're pulling together the science of machine learning with the cloud capabilities in Azure and the Epic software as a central nervous system across the healthcare organization to put this deterioration model directly into the ecosystem. We have vitals monitors that are taking vitals every minute. There's hundreds of constantly changing data points that humans could not possibly digest in real time.
When the alert goes off, it's triggered to the phone, so I can be anywhere in the hospital, and what it tells me is that I need to turn my attention to this patient. It's Francis.
And sit down and do an exam and really try to figure out why the artificial intelligence identified this patient at a high risk.
Take a quick look at your numbers. Want to make sure everything's looking okay for you, all right? And you realize that with that alert, you identified somebody who may have had a cardiac arrest, and you're actually able to prevent that because you had this notification. The goal is to get these patients to the ICU at least 4 hours earlier than what we would have done under normal clinical conditions.
During our pilot program
At Oshram Medical Center, we successfully reduced adverse events outside the ICU by 44%.
So we didn't just shift the arrests, we actually eliminated cardiac arrest from the floor.
It could provide some sense of security knowing that you have both humans and artificial intelligence looking after you while you're here.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker for this afternoon is Dr. Shoeman Anton, who is Associate Professor at the Department of Family Medicine. Her interest is in healthcare data, and she was instrumental in implementation of EPIC at AUB-MC, and she will tell us about that experience.
Hello, everyone. I know for the people who's been here since the morning, I know you're tired. I am. But bear with me. For those who joined us in the afternoon, I just want to, because my presentation will kind of shift gear through the presentations throughout the day. For those who didn't or missed our keynote speaker in the morning, Cassie, she mentioned about, she interestingly showed us artificial intelligence in the way of a recipe, and how the machine learning, deep learning algorithm, they're kind of recipes, microwave, etc. And all of them is to create something. And she put some cakes and pizzas in the morning. So my presentation is shifting the artificial intelligence. I'm not a data scientist, is shifting gear to the outcome of the data scientist. It's what they're trying to do is the outcome, which is us users. So first of all, I would just like to put some conflict of interest, because as Dr. Samia Khouri at the beginning said, we're definitely highlighting artificial intelligence and a little bit some bias for positive things about AI. We're not talking about privacy, we're not going for confidentiality, legislations, etc., although we just mentioned them from a high end. But just a little bit of something personal is like my journey with technology has started since my teen years back in school with this first computer, the Commodore, and the data set, which is even before the floppy disk. But I'm not that old. I turned 42 2 days ago. But still, this has been my passion for technology since ever. And when I wanted to join the university, I had two choices, actually. Either pre-med as chemistry or CCE. I have no idea why I ended up, because I accepted for both, but I have no idea why I ended up with chemistry. I have my two colleagues here. But then this was my journey, but my passion for technology has always been there. And with time, because we've been through the morning talking about change of careers and from where do you start and where do you end, this kept my passion. And through my years, I followed this passion with a master's in health informatics, which gave me the opportunity to help AUB MC in leading the project of EPIC implementation. I've been there since the early implementation of EPIC through now the go live. So my presentation is going to a little bit show you, we're still new in data because we've just went live, but I want to show you two things. My talk will be concentrating on two things. At least, first of all, show you some of the benefits of the implementation of the EHR. And I want to highlight the human, because many people in the healthcare, they are scared about the AI and they feel like it's going to replace us. I don't think so. But first of all, I would like to start with like kind of a common mental share model is what's an electronic health records. For many of us, and especially in the morning from our colleague in Jordan, because she was really telling us about how we suffer from lack of data in our region. Electronic health record is not a digitized paper chart. We're not talking about like scanning the paper chart and it's now digitized. So let's go beyond this. We're talking about added features to the digitized paper chart. So the electronic health record now we're talking about clinical decision support through AI, of course. And then this, I think, will take us to a wider circle, which is a new way of thinking about healthcare, which is data-driven healthcare. I want to share with you some landmarks, because many of our physicians, they would say, oh, now the electronic health records are here and they're going to replace us, or like we're no more useful. I think it's just a landmark through clinical medicine where it changed how we behave. I'm sure if you go back to the era when the stethoscope was created, I'm sure the physicians were really complaining and anxious, like, no more I'm going to rely on history, now I have to put this machine and to listen to sounds to get a decision. And then came the X-ray. I know now the X-ray people are afraid that they will be replaced by AI, but at that time, I'm sure like the clinicians were also bothered by, I used to depend on my history and physical exam. Now a simple X-ray is going to diagnose a pneumonia, or an X-ray is going to diagnose a fracture. And then through time we had EBM, evidence-based medicine, and again it's challenged the way we treat and we look at patient care. Because now again we're looking at data, but as in the morning the speaker said, we're looking at the data from far away. It's not related to my patient, it's a data somewhere. I'm getting the evidence from that data and trying to apply it to my patient. In my opinion, I think EHRs and data-driven healthcare is a new landmark that's going to change how we're going to heal or care for our patients. It's just a new way of thinking how to deliver care. And I think this new way of looking at healthcare has two kind of principles. One, we should embrace the EHR as a partner. It's not an enemy, it's not going to replace us, it's a partner. And second, we have to use the data, else there's no point of the EHR if we don't really, really take care of the data and make it helpful for us in taking care of our patients. So in my talk, I will tackle how the EHR is affecting 3 parts: how it's affecting the physician, how it's affecting the patient, and even how it's affecting from the patient-doctor relationship. I'm not going to go theoretical. I will go to give you a little bit some of the research that we've done through the past few years in this area. So for physicians, definitely we talk about 2 things: efficiency and quality of care. I think both of these matters for physicians. And the AI in the EHR, which is shown in personalization, I know for many healthcare workers, artificial intelligence is something very technical, but we use it in every day. So for now, when we're going on Epic Live, so when we have an order set, when we have a reminder, when we have an alert, then these are all clinical decision supports, and there is an AI going behind them. And we're just only like 3 months now for the go live, and when we, as part of Epic post-live survey results, you can see so as you can see, they asked the users on a Likert scale how much they were satisfied with some items. Green is good. And as you can see, just have a quick look at the figure, you see there are lots of greens. And the Epic users at AUBMC, they were saying that overall they are satisfied. Epic helped them to be efficient. Epic is easy to use and designed to their needs, so it's always important to fit the clinical workflow. It's not like something coming out of space. And the quality of patient care has really improved. So I know that this is maybe a very general idea because we're just asking people. But interestingly is that you can see some doctors really more satisfied than others, like the ED, physician, residents, and inpatient. And I think because they live in a high demand area where they need quick decisions and they don't have time to dig and look for data. So the AI is really helping them in finding bits and pieces in the medical records to help them make good decisions about healthcare. I know we've been only like 2-3 months, so this could be kind of a biased data, but so far, because we have order sets which standardize the care, we've already started to notice some improvement in some health outcomes, like how much blood pressure control, we're doing fine, but we're also on the increase. And more importantly, like something very simple, asking people about whether they're a smoker and advise them to stop smoking. And we all know if you just say for a person, stop smoking, this might help. And you can see the numbers, like we were really not doing very well in asking people whether they're smokers, and we are increasing on the curve. So I think the EHR and the implementation of Epic at AUBMC will really and definitely will increase our quality of care with time. Again, an opportunity for medical errors. For example, just in the month of January, we have 468 alerts for contraindications. Contraindications means like these 2 medicines should not be taken together. So this is a missed opportunity. It's not like that the doctor does not know, but there's lots of data there and lots of information. FDA updates its drug monograms every day. So it's really helping the doctor to really concentrate on the patient and leave the noise of finding data here and there. So this 468 is an opportunity for a missed medical error. So now we've been talking about the physician. And many people, they're trying to say like the EHR and with lots of the alerts and the AI intervening in our relationship is like we're becoming dehumanized and we're losing the patient. We're now busy with the computer. Actually, we did 2 studies, one quantitative and one qualitative. We asked 382 patients after they left the office visit, and we asked the patient to use a CAT score, which is 14 items that measure communication skills of the physician. 2/3 of the patient, when they were asked, they did not consider that using the computer during the visit affected their patient-doctor communication. And interestingly, actually, the scores increased when the doctor used the computer more. So the more the doctor checked the results, the more they retrieved patient information and educated patients and interacted with the computer, the more the patients considered the physician as a better communicator. And again, when we tried to ask people, so we had 49 interviews, again with people leaving the office visit, and asking them about the relationship. So like this is, I'm going to give you only 2 quotes. So if the doctor is smiling and interacting with me, the computer will not interfere and I will not pay attention. And it all depends on the proportion of computer use. If the physician gives me enough attention, then I would be happy. If he keeps tapping on the keyboard, then I will feel too rushed and the interview too mechanized. So it's really, we have to really rely on our data scientists to make our electronic health records, and I will be talking about this later on, to make it more usable so that the physician will not end up by really bothered by lots of alerts and decision support so that they can concentrate on their patients. And let's say what the patient says about the EHR. Again, they also consider it as a necessity, and they should think that it should be parts of our lives. And even patients understand that it's good at record keeping and information retrieval. And another thing the EHR will help us in healthcare is by patient portals. Again, we also did a study before the EPIC implementation. We asked 199 patients that are diabetic hypertensions about the concept of patient portal. And many of the patients, they perceived the benefit of the portal by saving them time, making it easier to have them, make them have a healthier life, give them greater control over their diseases, and support them during critical time of the disease. But, and interestingly is, like, although the majority really perceived the usefulness of the patient portal, only modestly people intended to use it. And actually the numbers really mimic the same. Because since the launch of EPIC, we have like 14,000 patients who activated their AUB Health, but like only 621 patients who really are using the My AUB Health and sending messages. So this gives me an idea is that there will be no success story without healthcare workers using the system, entering the data. So this conference is all about data science, so data is important. So if physicians and nurses and patients do not use the electronic health records, there will be no data for the data scientists to help us back. So that's why I will come back to 2 concepts, which is usability and training. So again, usability, we have a role for artificial intelligence in usability of electronic health records. We did a study where we have 2 screens, where one which is crowded for data for the physician, and one where they have to go and jump from one tab to another. Interestingly, the physicians like the interface where there's lots of data because they want everything in the place, which makes logic. So I think also there is a role for artificial intelligence in improving the usability of the electronic health records. And even in that experiment, we used many models from eye tracking to error rates to different ways to measure the efficiency, and they all ended up by like an interface with high data, but the data which is organized and meaningful to the physician, it doesn't matter if it's really crowded in one place. And finally, training. So again, we really need to look for artificial intelligence helping us in training physicians. There are many modalities for training physicians, and during EPIC implementation, we've used many models like super user training, classroom training, hands-on peer leading training. And when the users were asked, the majority, they felt supported, and the training was, they received, helped them do their job. Finally, I'm going to discuss again a study we're doing where we asked 50 users just after their training. We put them into a computer lab with an eye tracker, and we're trying to compare the eye tracking of the super user with the end user, trying to see if we can predict who are good at their job and who needs further training. So far, we are still in the data analysis, but a general subjective results is, on average, only 12% we had error rate when they're doing the tasks. So it seems like the training was successful. And 40% of the attendings considered the training very effective. And they did have some suggestions for improvement of the training. So we've just implemented EPIC at AUB-MC. So where's the future? And mainly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of EHR in general. It's artificial intelligence. I know artificial intelligence has lots of meanings, whether if you're coming from a data scientist background or from a healthcare worker or just a physician or a nurse background. But I just want to a little bit give you some idea about things that's going to happen in the future, is happening and is going to improve. For example, the artificial intelligence through natural processing language, they're going to help us in clinical documentation. In the morning, there have been discussions about medical conversations. So rather than the physician concentrating at the end of the session and writing their notes, what if the artificial intelligence help us to capture the conversation and give us a summary of the conversation? Predictive algorithms. So predictive algorithms is helpful in our field, healthcare, in image interpretation, and having some prediction models. So you can have some, if you go for PubMed, you have recent publications where they have did some prediction models where they can predict if a patient is near sepsis or is pending heart failure, just from data captured from the electronic health records. And of course, with the clinical decision support, but the artificial intelligence is going to move it from a rule-based. For now, the decision support is like, if you're diabetic, do this. If in the record you're a female, do this. But the AI can help us to do clinical decision support individualized. So for this patient, for this data, this is the proper decision to help you further. So this is just a glimpse of what can AI help us as physicians in our care. And I will conclude is, the best is yet to come, but we really need, as healthcare workers, to embrace EHR and help the data scientists to help us in taking care of our patients. Thank you.
Okay, so please, the speakers should come and have a seat here for the Q&A session.
Any questions?
Question to Dr. Antoun. Unfortunately, we have another panel. I didn't see all the presentation, but something, just a question concerning when we talk about artificial intelligence. For sure, you have your data. And do you use to flash your database, knowledge database, with others' information, let's say available? As you said, you use food and drugs updates and so on for the drugs. It is real time or in deferred time?
You mean for the clinical decision support of drug interactions?
Yes.
So no, this is, when you mean real time, yes, of course, the patient is directly, and this is individualized for the patient, but then this is coming just only from the records, so from FDA. So
yes,
it's not
so
dynamic.
You have this update continuously in order to be able to
yes,
do
of
this.
course. So throughout the day, they've always been talking about, now today is about the correct data.
Mm.
So of course, if I'm not updated in my data, which is showing the interaction, then I'm going to reach to the wrong decision.
Okay.
So of course, you have to make sure that you're using the proper data, for example, from the FDA, and it's keeping updated.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. I want to ask Mrs. Williams. I want to know more when the startups want to do an application or they want to know more about the accurate data and the accurate percentage from the data. The World Health Organization, from where it gets its own data, from where it gets the right percentage when we want to depend on it, on any research we do it on university, or we want to do a proposal or anything. I need to know a help because I'm doing my own app and I need to know if I can depend on the World Health Organization percentage on the data science topic. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't know the validity of the World Health Organization's data, but so recall and precision rates are how we calculate how well a machine algorithm is working, right? And in order for us to be able to calculate, so recall and precision rates are basically the false positives and false negatives in our predictions relative to a model, right? So we want to be very precise, but we also want to have very good recall. So I would suggest that validation data sets are super important, and we usually use golden masters, where we have one set of data that we keep that is labeled, and we have a very high confidence that that data is labeled very accurately. So when we calculate a new model, or we change something about our model, we'll compare the results to that golden master set of data to verify that the precision and recall rates remain correct, or that we're still producing the appropriate outcomes. So let me give an example for people who aren't necessarily in machine learning. We do a lot of work with de-identification of data. So we'll have a master list of data that says it's fake. It says, here's unstructured data, and we've labeled all of the names, or all of the cities, or all of the birth dates. And we know how many birth dates, names, and cities are in this data set. And we know that it's accurately labeled. So we set that aside, and we build new models for de-identification, and then we use our new model against that golden master data set, and we can, with good recall, we catch everything we expected, and then from a precision standpoint, we see how many things we mislabeled as a name, a city, or something like that, and then we can verify that we were doing this very accurately. So it's important to have that master data set, and this is where I think in healthcare we don't have very good data. So one of there are two data sets that we use that are public data sets. One is Mimic3, which was put out through MIT for a competition, and that's very well labeled data, and it's publicly available. All you have to do is agree to the license terms. And the other is called I2B2. And these are both good data sets for health-related machine learning tests because they're already pre-labeled data sets. Is that helpful?
Thank you. Yes.
I want to add to this one is just indeed there's a lot of effort in the community to do a lot of challenges. So there are a lot of blind data. That means, and I would actually invite everybody, particularly students and also but startups, to participate in those challenges. It's not only big companies, but we really see a lot of startups competing those challenges, where you actually you get your testing or your training and testing set, but you also get a complete blind data set that then you get validated. That doesn't mean, just disclaimer, that the data are not noisy, or that whatever works on the training will equally work on blind sets and so on. But it's an effort globally that is organizing, availability of data and a common kind of benchmarking when we can test it and validate what we are doing.
Thank you very much, all of you. And I have a comment and a question for EPICS. You said electronic patient IC record something. So you are starting here as a database. And from Dr. You showed that the data presented is descriptive. Now, if you have so many indicators, you make life of a doctor very difficult. So the question here, aggregating more the data for better decision making. Does your system provide analytics? First question. Second, you are using a UBMC data. Now, patient in Lebanon could be different than patient in US. Do we have access to data so we can conduct comparative analysis? Or use it to your own to develop your own businesses? So here's a question. Do you have partnership with AUB, whereby we have our own medical hospital and we have our own research team? Then we can advance medical health care in the region rather than relying on you on biased patient in US that they have different characteristics than patient in our field, on our area. I thank you.
Boy, there's a lot in there. I'll start with the easy one. Yes, we have analytics in Epic. The other thing you talk about is really, I think where you were going initially at least, is to capture all this data. If you go overboard, it's a burden on the physicians. So we have a whole team around physician happiness, and we actually have analytics about how the physicians are using the system. So the system is monitoring itself to figure out if the physicians are doing more work than what they need to do. So this is the work that we need to do well, so that it's not a burden, and yet you get the data. So the third thing you asked was more about your own data here at AUBMC compared to data in the US, and that's an excellent question. So the first thing is, we don't own the data for any of our customers. Actually, each organization owns its own data. So it's living here. The second piece about it is making sure that every one of our customers knows how to use the system, how to get at the data. So one of the things that your team did was, a good number of the project team came and lived with us for nearly 9 months to learn the system just as if they were any Epic staff. I think they were indistinguishable from the Epic staff, so that there is no need to go back to Epic to get at your own data, explore it. So there's components of all those things that we think about. And then the fourth thing was kind of training the model, so different populations. We have a good number of data scientists at Epic. They do look at different populations as they are perfecting the models. I guess perfecting is a bad word, improving. And then we also give our customers we call it the cognitive computing development platform, so that they can train their own models. And so then collaboratively we can compare. So if there's something a bit weird about one of our standard models here, then we can work together and figure out how to tune things a little differently for this population. And I do believe that gives you an opportunity to be a leader in this region with the insights you may have. Did I answer those questions? Yes. Okay.
Different places, using the analytic part that you are not providing to give you better insight for you and the rest. And I don't know whether
Really, do you want to answer?
Feel free.
Yeah. So I get your answer. I get your question because it has two parts. I know we're using data like loosely today, especially now in the healthcare section in the afternoon, because I know from the audience many of you are not data scientists. So the way you're asking is whether me as a hospital, I can go to do some analytics and see how am I doing. Yes, this is definitely there in Epic and we can use it. So this is one part. But when we're talking about like data and the algorithm and the machine learning and the artificial and all these buzzwords, we're really talking about understanding. So the data becomes not what helped me in my decision making now today in my hospital for my finance, for my efficiency, for improving policies, etc. We're really talking about, like, for the example, for proficiency or efficiency of the physician. So we're really looking about how physicians are using the system so that some data scientists will go into that data and see how they can refine it and help us in guiding us a better algorithm where they can give us decision like, this is the best way to do it. So there are two types of how to manage the data. One which we use on a daily basis, which most of us use it like in quality improvements and etc. analytics. But then when the data scientists come, they're really talking about a higher level of how to use the data.
I can tell you from your screen, you are showing bigger scale averages. This assumes that all indicators are equal in importance, but not all of them are equally important. So when you put importance to an indicator, you change the history. And that's what I'd like to achieve, a higher level of prediction or analytic rather than just descriptive. Imagine if you are a doctor who
That's why we.
Your time is very efficient.
Yeah, that's why we need our data scientists to help us to put some predictive models to help us, because we cannot, from our regular minds, to make.
I get the point.
The question, please. My question. Thank you for the presentations. My question is for Dr. Antoon. Concerning the electronic medical record, how do you deal with the electronic signature of the user? Healthcare users, the first, to be accurate. And second, for the patient, you know that in the accreditation, all in Lebanon and everywhere, we have the informed consent to be signed by the physician and by the patient. Did you accept an electronic signature for both, or still for the informed consent, it is on paper? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to give the question to my colleague, and I will tell her why. Because he's talking about legislations. So he's talking about a place in the world where they still, because most of us on paper chart, and they do not agree. So I think you're best to talk about how we moved with the technology without having standards.
Sure. So guess what, everybody? A digitized signature, an electronic signature, and a digital signature are three completely different things. Did you? Oh, so one requires cryptography, one requires a scanner, and one requires authentication. And so different countries have written different rules for what constitutes an electronic, digital, or digitized signature. And depending on your country and your region, you may require one or two or three or all of, or none of those things. Or you might require a wet signature on every single document, which is also true in some countries. So it really is dependent on your local jurisdiction and what your requirements and demands are. Now, my first incarnation as an engineer was as a cryptography engineer, as a crypto engineer. So we built cryptographic methods for creating a non-reputable digital signature for documents and email messages and all kinds of things. And that requires a level of infrastructure and a bunch of know-how and capability for people that was overly burdensome for some use cases, like in the healthcare industry. So like in the United States, we have a law that requires that you use a digital signature for certain types of transactions. For example, if you're going to create an FDA medical device and you're going to do some change management and digitally sign a design document that explains that change and how it might affect clinical care, it has to have a cryptographically significant type of digital signature. For electronic medical records, you can use authentication and have a electronic representation of your signature using authentication only, and it was still a qualified signature on a medical record, at least in the United States. So it really depends, again, on what is your local jurisdictional requirement, and there are several methods. Right? So when you go to the credit card kiosk at your local bank and you take out money and they ask you for a signature on a scratch pad, you know, with the little pen, that's a form of electronic signature that's acceptable to the financial services industry. Healthcare has a different standard as well. And again, it's very dependent on which country you're working in. So I don't know what the law is in Lebanon, but I imagine you're meeting it. Right. Did that answer your question, Iffy? People do that in a lot of places in the United States also. Yeah, it depends. The patient signature is another one, and even in the United States, we're still scanning people's physical signature because you don't have the kiosk with the little signature, and there's not a lot of like precedence for which is liability bearing. Now in the US, that kind of scrawled like you have on a credit card slip is sufficient for even a patient signature. So it depends, again, on what your country requires. But yeah, scanning those records is just a waste of everybody's time because it's not structured data and it doesn't help you very much from an analytic standpoint. Too much information. Again.
Yeah. Hello, everyone here. I have a question that is related to the adequate patient management across Lebanon, actually. And the question is addressed to Dr. Antoon and to Lila. I have attended one meeting that is tackling the digital health in Lebanon, okay? And there's lots of talk about that the patient data is lost when the patient goes from one hospital to another hospital and so on. So my question is, for the EPIC EHR, is it compatible and is it with other EHR used by other hospitals? And there will be any like exchange of data across the different hospitals? And the other question, also related, there be any collaboration with the MOH, for example, to put some standards to use the EHR all over Lebanon? Thank you.
I'll briefly, and then I'll give you the floor. So the concept you're talking is about interoperability and how the systems will talk to each other. And I think this is a big challenge everywhere, but I think EPIC are, you have 1 or 2 slides on interoperability.
Oh my gosh, I had so many slides I didn't show on this. So where there are standards, it's obviously much easier. So the platform that we use to exchange records across totally different health systems is called Care Everywhere. And we started that even before the standards were there in the United States. And the real hard part actually wasn't the technology for doing this. It was, what are the rules? We call it the rules of the road. To allow people to feel safe having their record be exchanged. What are the assumptions they can have? So crafting those rules and getting every single one of our organizations to sign and abide by that, that was really the hard work 10, 12 years ago. And then the regulations kind of followed because we became the de facto standard in the United States. The regulators looked at what we were doing to create some of the standards in the United States. So here, the issue likely is there are hospitals don't have systems capable of sending a record. If they do, then at least here they can take it. That's the first step.
Can I make one tiny little point about that? I had a really interesting conversation with a patient one day about health information exchange. And it was this, and it really rocked my world, I'll be honest. And then as a software developer, this is something that stuck with me. She came to me in tears and she said, look, I have a diagnosis of an illness. I don't know if it's real. I want a second opinion. But everywhere I go, they already have my test results. They already have my clinical notes, and it's biasing everybody to say, oh, I'm already diagnosed with this disease. She goes, I just want a fair second opinion. How do I make sure my record doesn't go where I don't want it to go? And so I had always assumed that it was nothing but goodness in sharing information between providers, and that was something that was just something we should always do. But as we have to talk to patients, we have to talk to their families, members who are helping them through these difficult care decisions, and it's a really important part of software design, technical design, and data sharing approaches to really understand all the use cases, both positive and negative, for how you would accommodate for some of these needs, and not always assume that more data is always good for people. Anyway, 99% of the time it's true.
I have a question for Dr. Gobrani from Cognitive Healthcare. Hello, okay. You spoke about the predictive medicine, and you mentioned about the oncology software that helps healthcare provider in decision support. However, because we're talking about cognition, are you working as a company, as IBM, for a predictive model to in terms of brain health, predicting risk of dementia, where you can read all the brain imaging, software that reads brain imaging and through a certain algorithm or whatever, looking for atrophy, certain areas, and then they can predict for a person, combined with a certain genetic profile, they can predict risk of Alzheimer and dementia. So is IBM working on a certain model or anything like that?
So IBM is a big company, and I know we do. So in my team, we don't have projects in brain imaging. But I know at IBM that we have a lot of activities in brain imaging, so MRI, CT, and so on. And I know that there are also projects in Alzheimer and dementia. But my team is not working, so I cannot tell you exactly what they're doing. But if you're interested, I'm happy to figure out and give you the contacts, certainly.
Hello, my name is Jonathan. First off, I want to say all of your work is incredibly brilliant, and thank you for doing it. I had a question for Ms. Williams and possibly Ms. Vaughn as well. You said it took you 14 months to gather the new data, and Google went out and paid for and acquired that data. Well, whoever did. But the process of doing so probably has benefits to the healthcare industry for how to acquire uniform data for artificial intelligence, and then for incorporate that information with the electronic health reports. I was wondering if there's any collaborative avenues for that happening.
Such a great question. It kind of highlights some of the challenges of obtaining data for machine learning purposes. At least, the example I was speaking of that took 14 months was a research project in the United States. So when you go to a health system and you ask to be able to do human subjects research, which this all qualifies as, it's a pretty arduous process to ensure that all of a person's rights and liberties are preserved. And so the negotiation process to even do, because we're talking about large-scale data, right? Because you can't train a model on tiny bits of data. And most of the, in my opinion, I worked on institutional review boards for a while. I was the privacy reviewer for a lot of data projects. Most of those projects involved a couple hundred records, maybe a couple thousand records, but not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of records. The apparatus for clinical research is actually not particularly well designed for very large data projects like that, especially if there's any identifiers like zip code or dates of service or things like that that would be relevant but are still considered identifiable in everywhere. So that negotiation process is protracted because you have to establish that you're going to provide some sort of benefit to the patients that are involved, and you have to prove that there's not going to be a potential for harm for those patients that are involved. They're going to validate that your protocol for delivering that, for performing your task is appropriate. There's going to be a clinical review, there's going to be a regulatory review, there's going to be a safety review, and it's just a very protracted process, especially to get very large quantities of data because there's so much liability and risk for the organization that gifts it to you. Now, that you asked really is, that was hard, so why can't we make it more widely available? Research projects, when they're approved, are approved for a specific protocol, for a specific use case, and at the end of it, you have to return and destroy that data. You don't get to keep it, and you don't get to decide how to share it more broadly. So our collaborations do involve a lot of third parties, but they come in as fellows or residents or somebody who's going to come and work with us on the research so that they can be a party to those arrangements. But it's actually quite difficult to create that data set and then make it more broadly available. And partly it's because de-identification is nearly impossible, and anybody who's tried to make a really large de-identified data set out of healthcare data and publish it for public use cases has gotten burned pretty good, right? Because it's almost impossible to get it completely right, and you're 100% accountable if you get it wrong. So there's not a huge incentive to put out big data sets for more broad usage if there's any potential for that data to be not perfectly cleansed. Did that help answer the question? It's very limited use cases, and you can't just add new third parties to the approval process. So you kind of have to come in and be part of our workforce before we can help. Yeah. Right, we talked a little bit about transfer learning, and we've actually released quite a number of the machine learning algorithms that might be useful. So like Deep Variant is a genomics sequencing algorithm that we released through GitHub so that anybody can leverage and use that for their own additional training purposes. So we released quite a number of the machine learning algorithms we think would be generally useful because we can train those on large data sets because we have access to them, but others don't. We can release those models, and then it's a stepping stone for your additional training efforts. But we release those through GitHub fairly routinely. Is that, yeah.
Well, let us thank our speakers in the digital health and AI track. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this brings our day to a close. I would like to thank our phenomenal speakers who traveled all the way to participate in the conference, and those who participated who are here and showed a great interest to participate in today's conference. I would like to thank everybody who attended, everyone, all people who were able to make it today and who came here from all over Lebanon. Thank you very much. I would like to thank our online audience, and all the people who made today possible, and especially our social media student ambassadors. Thank you very much. Until next year. Thank you.
اسمم هدولة